The frost had come in the night and taken the whole valley. It lay white on the yard stones, and white along the top rail of the fence, and white in the wheel ruts, where the cart had stood since autumn. The air did not move. Sound carried oddly on such mornings. A dog barked somewhere beyond the orchard, and it seemed to stand at the gate. Damaris came out of the house before 6 with a hammer in her hand. She wore her old gray dress. The new one lay across the bed upstairs, and she would not put it on until she had to. Her breath rose in front of her face and hung there. She crossed the yard to the trough. The ice on it was thick as a window pane. She set the hammer against the edge and struck once. A white line ran through the middle and did not break. She struck again. It broke. She lifted the pieces out with her bare hand and laid them on the stones, and the cold climbed her wrist and stayed. There was no groom at Larksmere to do this. There had been one until the spring. When she was a girl, there had been 2 men in the yard and a dairy that ran. Now there was her father, who did not come down before 9, and her mother, who did not come down at all, and Damaris, who came out at 6. She liked the hour. She had never said so to anyone. It was the only part of the day that asked nothing of her and gave her the frost and the smell of cold iron. She was wiping her hand dry on her skirt when she heard wheels on the frozen road. The church at Wickenlow was small and very cold. It held 90 people, and it had been full since 9:30. Damaris walked up the aisle on her father's arm. She looked straight ahead. She did not see any of them. She saw the stone floor and the worn hollow before the step where 300 years of feet had waited. The Duke of Hallstein was waiting also. He was tall, and he did not turn to watch her come. That was the first thing she learned about her husband. He stood with his hands behind his back and his eyes on the window above the altar. And when she reached him, he turned his head and looked at her once, briefly, the way a man looks at a door to be certain it is shut. She said her part, he said his. His voice was low and level and gave away nothing. The ring went onto her finger. It was too large and it turned at once, and she closed her hand around it. Outside, the bells went out across the frozen fields, and the guests came into the hard white light, and there was noise and breath in the air, and somebody threw grain. She was a duchess. It had taken 11 minutes. Hallstein Court stood 3 miles off at the end of an avenue of limes. She had seen it all her life the way one sees a hill. Now the carriage turned in at the gates, and the house came up gray and enormous out of the frost, and she counted the windows because she could not think what else to do with her mind, and lost count, and began again. The great hall had been laid for 200. There were oranges on the tables in December, and a fire at each end that a man fed all morning. The plate on the sideboard was gold. It had come out of the strong room for the first time in 9 years, and everybody knew it, and said so quietly to the person beside them. Damaris sat at her husband's right hand and ate almost nothing. The woman came in at the second remove. She came in without hurry and without apology, and a footman drew back a chair for her at the near end of the high table, 4 places down, and she sat in it as though she had sat in it 1,000 times, which she had. She wore deep blue. Her hair was pale and simply dressed. She was not beautiful in the way the county had described her, and Damaris understood at once that the county had never looked properly. She was something better. She was entirely at ease. Nobody announced her. Nobody had to. She felt the room turn its attention on her, like a lamp carried into a dark passage. She made herself lift her fork. She made herself set it down again without shaking, and that was the whole of what she could manage. Then the rector rose and tapped his glass, and said that it fell to the bridegroom to speak. The Duke stood. The hall went quiet by degrees, table by table, until the only sound was the fire. He did not look at his wife. "You have come a long way in poor weather," he said, "and I will not keep you. There is a thing that will be said in this county whether I say it or not. I would rather it were said correctly, and by me." Nobody moved. Mrs. Locksley has kept the east wing of this house for 4 years. She keeps it still. Her place at this table is where it has always been, and it will not be moved. Nothing in this house alters today. I have never lied to a single person in this room, and I do propose to begin at my own table on my own wedding morning. He paused. "That is all," he said. "Eat well." He sat down. The silence that followed was not the silence of shock. It was the silence of 200 people deciding at once and separately that they had heard nothing unusual. Somewhere down the hall, a woman laughed too loudly and stopped. Damaris had a glass in her right hand. She had been holding it since before he stood. Her fingers had closed, and the stem had gone in too, and there was a thin, bright line across the inside of 2 fingers, with a bead of red standing on it. Very small, very neat. She did not look at it a second time. She put the broken glass down on the cloth, quietly, and she took up the full one at her left hand instead. And she stood. 200 faces came round. Her father, halfway down the second table, put his hand over his eyes. "The Duke has told you what will not change in this house," she said. Her voice was not loud. It reached the far wall. "He has not, however, thanked you, and that is the one duty of this morning which ought not to be left undone. So I will do it in his place." She thanked the rector for standing an hour in an unheated church. She thanked the people of Wickenlow, who had walked out from the village in the frost and would walk home in the dark. She thanked the kitchens by name, the cook, and the 2 girls under her, because the oranges had come 9 miles by cart in a hard frost and had arrived whole. She said she had been in this house since 10 o'clock that morning and had been shown nothing but kindness by every person in it who was paid to be here, and that she hoped in time to be worth the trouble. She lifted the glass. "To the house of Holstein," she said. "Long may it stand." 200 people drank because there was nothing else on earth that they could do. Damaris set the glass down. She turned to her husband, who had risen when she rose, and she looked at him properly for the first time that day. His eyes were a dark gray, and there was nothing in them she could read. "You will forgive me," she said. "It has been a long morning." And she walked the length of the hall alone, past every table, at a pace that would not have disgraced a woman crossing a room to fetch a shawl. She had almost reached the doors when something caught the cuff of her sleeve. Damaris looked down. It was a child, a girl of 9 or 10, very thin, in a good dress that did not fit, with dark hair cut short and level, as though somebody practical had done it in a hurry. She had crossed 12 feet of open floor in front of 200 people to do it. The whole hall was watching now, and this time it was not pretending otherwise. The child held out a folded square of paper. Damaris knelt. Her knee found the cold flag through her dress. She took the paper. The child let go and stood with her hands at her sides and her eyes fixed on Damaris's face, waiting. Damaris unfolded it. It was a drawing, charcoal, on the back of a torn account sheet. A woman sitting on a bench with her hands in her lap and her head turned a little to one side, listening to something outside the edge of the paper. It was not a child's drawing. It had been done by somebody who had drawn the same thing many, many times. Behind her, someone made a small sound. The housekeeper was standing 3 paces off with a dish in her hands she had forgotten she was holding. "Mrs. Bettridge," Damaris said, "whose child is this?" But the housekeeper was not looking at the child. She was looking at the paper, and her face had gone the color of the tablecloth. Then the Duke was there. He came without hurry, and he stopped, and he looked down at the drawing in his wife's hands, and Damaris felt the temperature of the room change. "Your Grace," said Mrs. Bettridge, and her voice came out wrong. That is Tamsin's paper. I know whose paper it is, he said. 3 years, Mrs. Bettridge said. 3 years she has drawn that woman, and no other thing, hundreds of them, in the nursery and on the stairs and on the backs of your own letters. And not one of us could ever get a name out of her, because she has not spoken since the inn at Caudry Cross. She looked from the drawing to the woman kneeling on the floor and back again. The Duke of Halstein did not move at all. He had searched for that face for 3 years. He had paid men to find it. He had begun to believe it did not exist. He had married it that morning, and he had stood up at his own table, and in front of 200 people he had chosen somebody else. 6 weeks before the frost, a letter had come to Larksmere. It was not from the Duke. It was from a man named Crail, who signed himself as acting in the matter for the House of Halstein, and it asked whether Miss Quennell would receive him on a question of business at whatever hour was convenient to her. Her father read it 4 times, and then went out to the orchard and stood there until it was dark. The truth of Larksmere was simple, and everybody in the county knew it except the people who lived there, who had agreed not to say it aloud. The mortgage came due at Lady Day. The dairy had been let go 2 years since. The horses had gone in June, sold at the Michaelmas fair for a good deal less than they were worth. Her mother had been in the upstairs room since the spring, and the doctor came now only when he was in the lane anyway, because he had stopped being paid. Mr. Crail came on a Tuesday. He was a small, dry man with ink on his second finger, and he did not waste her time. He put the settlement in front of her. It cleared the mortgage. It cleared the debts entire, including the ones her father had not told her about, and there were 4 of those. It provided her mother with an annuity of $200 a year, paid quarterly, secured on land, and it would go on being paid whatever afterward happened to Damaris herself. Then he told her why. There was a child at Halstein Court. Her name was Tamsin Teal, and she was the daughter of the Duke's cousin, and her mother and father had both died in the same week 3 winters ago on the North Road. The Duke had taken her. He had been named her guardian in the will, and the will had a condition in it, put there by a careful man who had not expected to die at 31, and the condition was a settled household. The child had an uncle, Oberon Teal. He had begun proceedings in the summer to have the wardship set aside, and his case rested on the east wing of Halstein Court and the woman who had kept it for 4 years, and it was, Mr. Crail said, looking at the table rather than at Damaris, not a weak case. A married duke is a settled household, he said. A married duke is very difficult to move. So, it is not a marriage, Damaris said. It is a wall. Mr. Crail said that he had been instructed to answer any question she asked with the truth, and that yes, it was a wall. She sat for a while. Then she said that she had one condition, and it was not money. Mr. Crail took out his pencil. I will not be lied to, she said, and I will not be lied about. I am not asking him to give anything up. I am not asking him to send anyone away. I have no right to ask it, and I would not want a thing got that way. I am asking that nobody in that house pretend. If there is a woman in the East Wing, let there be a woman in the East Wing. Let nobody dress it up for me. Let nobody move her out of a room when I come into it. I would rather live 30 years in a cold truth than 1 year in a warm lie. Mr. Crail wrote it down. He read it back to her. She said that was correct. He carried it to Halstein Court, and the Duke of Halstein read it, and the Duke of Halstein signed it, and it was returned to Larksmere in a sealed cover with nothing added. Her father wept when the settlement was executed. Actually wept, with his hands on the kitchen table. Her mother, who could no longer come downstairs, listened to the whole of it, and then said only, Damaris, you have made a very careful bargain, and I hope you have left yourself somewhere in it. She had thought about that for 6 weeks, and had not found an answer. Now she sat on the edge of a bed in the west wing of a house she had been married into that morning, still in her wedding dress, with 2 fingers wrapped in a strip torn off her own petticoat, and she understood that she had got exactly what she asked for. She had asked not to be lied about. He had not lied about her. He had stood up at his own table and told the plain truth, in her hearing, on her wedding day, with 200 people to witness it, and he had kept his word to the letter, and it had been the cruelest thing anybody had ever done to her. And the paper was still in her hand. She smoothed it flat on her knee and looked at the woman on the bench. She had never told anybody where she was in February 3 years ago. Not her father, not her mother, not the rector, not her friend Bess, not one living soul. She had been 60 miles up the North Road in the worst week of that winter, and she had come home 4 days later and said she had been at her aunt's, and nobody had ever asked her again. She knew exactly what the inn at Caudry Cross looked like. He came to her door at 9 that night. She knew it was him before he knocked, because the whole west wing had been silent for 2 hours, and then there was a step in the passage that did not hurry and did not apologize. She opened the door. He had changed out of the wedding clothes. He stood with his hands at his sides, and he did not come in. "You are hurt," he said. "I am not. Your hand. It is a cut. I have had worse from a gate latch." He looked at her for a moment. Then he said, "I have come to ask you about the drawing." And there it was. Not, "Forgive me." Not, I did not think how it would sound. Not one word about the hall, or the toast, or the 200 people who were at this moment riding home over the frozen roads telling each other what they had seen. He had come up 2 flights of stairs at 9 at night to ask her about a piece of paper. Damaris found that she wasn't angry. She was something colder and further along than angry. "There is nothing to tell you," she said. "Mrs. Bettridge says the child has drawn that face for 3 years. Then you should ask Mrs. Bettridge. I am asking my wife." "Your wife," said Damaris, "is going home in the morning." That stopped him. She saw it stop him. It was the first thing all day that had reached him at all, and she took no pleasure in it, and she noted it. "We are married," he said. "We are. I am not proposing to undo it. You will keep your wall, and the child will keep her guardian, and my mother will keep her 200 a year. I signed that, and I do not go back on what I sign. But I have been one day in this house, and I have been made a public thing in it, and I am going home to Larksmere tomorrow, and you may explain that to the county however you like, because you are very good at explaining things to rooms." He did not answer for a long moment. Then he said, "I will not stop you. I did not think you would." He inclined his head, very slightly, and he went away down the passage, and she shut the door and stood with her back against it for a long time in the dark. She left at 8 in the morning. The whole household found something to do in the front hall while she went. Mrs. Bettridge came out onto the step and gripped her hand and did not say anything, which was the kindest thing anybody in that house had done for her. The child was not there. Damaris looked for her. He came the following afternoon. She was in the yard when he came, in the old gray dress, with her sleeves turned back, doing what she had done every day of her life before somebody put a gold ring on her. She heard the horse in the lane, and she did not go in. He rode a big gray, and he came alone. No groom, no carriage, nothing to look at. He got down at the gate and led the horse in and stopped in the middle of the yard, and the frost had thawed, and the yard was mud, and it came over his boots, and he didn't appear to notice. Her father came out of the house at a run. "Papa," said Damaris, "go inside." "Damaris, that is the Duke of. I know who it is. Go inside." Her father looked at his daughter. He had shouted at her a great many times in her life, and she had let him. He went inside, so they were alone in the yard with the horse and the broken ice still lying at the foot of the trough, where she had thrown it 2 mornings ago and had not cleared away. "I have come to make you an offer," he said. "Then you have wasted a ride. You have not heard it." "I do not need to hear it. I know what it is because there are only 3 of them. You will offer me money, which I will not take, because I already have the settlement and it is signed, and I will not be paid twice for the same silence. You will offer me a house somewhere else, Bath or Lyme or anywhere at all, with a good road out of it, so that I may be a duchess at a distance and never trouble anybody. Or you will offer to have the marriage set aside, which would lose you the child, so you will not offer that. But you would have got round to it out of fairness, because you are a fair man in the way a ledger is fair." The Duke of Holstein stood in the mud and looked at her. "It was the second," he said. "Bath or Lyme?" "Lyme. There is a house." "No." He waited. "No," she said again. "I will tell you what I will take, and you may agree to it or not. And if you do not, I will still live here, and you will still be married to me, and neither of us will die of it." "Say it." 1. I come back to Holstein Court, and I live in it, and I am not put in a wing. 2. Nothing in your arrangement changes, because I asked for that in writing, and I meant it. And if you send that woman away on my account, I will know that you did it to make yourself comfortable, and not to make me so. 3. She stopped. He said, 3. 3, said Damaris. You will never again say a true thing about me in a room where I cannot answer. You may say anything you like to my face. You may say it in front of your aunt and your lawyers and the whole of the county, if you tell me first that you mean to. But you will not stand up at a table and hand me to 200 people the way a man hands a dog to a keeper. That is all. That is the whole of it. The horse shifted and blew. And Caudry Cross, he said. No. I am asking. I know you are asking. I have heard you ask twice now, and you have never once asked me how my hand is, or whether my mother is living, or what my name was before it was yours. You want the inn. You have wanted the inn since the moment you saw that paper, and you would give me Lyme and a carriage, and 400 a year for it. And it is the only thing I have got that you cannot buy, and I am keeping it. He said nothing at all. Then he did something she had not expected. He nodded, once, and he stopped asking. Very well, he said. Your 3 conditions. I agree to all of them. That easily. You did not ask for anything that is mine to refuse. He gathered the rein. He put his foot in the stirrup, and then he stood down again, as though something had occurred to him, and he did not look at her when he said it. She has not eaten since yesterday morning, he said. Tamsin, she will not come out of the passage outside the west wing. She has taken a chair from the nursery and put it against the door of the room you slept in, and she is sitting in it. Mrs. Bettridge cannot move her. I cannot move her. I have not been able to move that child in 3 years, and I have not, until this week, ever seen her want anything. He put his foot in the stirrup again. I am not using her to bring you back, he said. If I were, I would not have told you. I am telling you, because you asked me not to lie to you, and this is the truth. And now you have it, and you may do as you please with it. He rode out of the yard. Damaris stood where she was until the sound of the horse had gone out of the lane and out of the road beyond it, and there was nothing left but a crow somewhere and the drip of the thaw off the byre roof. Then her legs went. She did not fall. She got as far as the trough and put both hands flat on the stone rim and stood there, bent over it like a woman who has run a long way. The old ice was still lying at the foot of it in 3 gray lumps, going soft now, and she looked at them and could not for the life of her remember breaking them. She had won. That was the strange part. She had stood in her own yard in her own dress and named 3 conditions to a duke, and he had agreed to every one of them without a word. And she had refused a house at Lyme and 400 a year, and she had kept the only thing she owned outright. And she was shaking so hard she could hear her own teeth. It was not the yard, and it was not the ring, and it was not the 200 people. She knew what it was, and she made herself say it inside her head so that it would stop being a shadow. A child had taken a chair out of a nursery and put it against a door. Nothing came for 2 days. On the 3rd day, a boy walked out from Halstein with a package under his arm, and it was not a letter, and it weighed more than a letter. Damaris opened it on the kitchen table. Drawings, 40 or 50 of them, some on good paper and some on the backs of bills, and one on the flyleaf torn out of a book of sermons. The same woman in every one. Sitting. Always sitting. Always with her head turned a little. Always listening to something off the edge of the page. In some of them, there was a window behind her. In one, there was snow coming past the window, and in that one, the woman was holding something in her lap that the charcoal had not been able to make into anything. At the bottom of the package was a single sheet in a hard black hand. Madam. These were outside my study door on Thursday morning. They were not put there by a servant. I have made no request in this note, and I make none now. You owe this house nothing. Your conditions are agreed, and they hold whether you ever come back or not. And the settlement holds, and your mother's annuity holds, and none of it depends on any answer you give me. I am telling you only that they exist. I thought you had a right to know they existed. If you do not write, I will not write again. Halstein. Damaris sat with the sheet in her hand for a long while. Then she folded the drawings back into their paper and put the paper on the shelf over the fire, and did not take it down again for 2 days. On the 3rd morning, she carried the whole package upstairs. Her mother was propped high on the pillows, with the shawl round her shoulders, and the good light coming in over the fields. Damaris put the drawings on the counterpane, and she told her mother everything except the one thing, and her mother went through them slowly, one at a time, with her thin hands. At last she said, "This child has been looking for you for 3 years. I know, and you have been sitting in this house for 2 days deciding whether it is a trap. I have." Her mother laid the last drawing down. "Damaris," she said, "I told you on the day you signed that paper that I hoped you had left yourself somewhere in the bargain. I have thought about it since, and I was wrong to say it, because you had not. You left yourself out of it entirely. You bargained for me, and for your father, and for the roof, and the only thing you asked for yourself was that nobody should lie to you, which is not a want, it is a floor." She looked at her daughter. "That man has kept his word twice now, and it has cost you both times. I do not know what he is. But that child is not a bargain, and she is not a wall, and she has drawn your face 50 times, and she is sitting in a chair outside an empty room." Damaris looked at the snow coming past the window and the charcoal. "I will go in the morning," she said. The chair was still against the door. Damaris came up the west stairs at 10 in the morning with the mud of the Larksmere Lane still on her hem, and the passage was long and cold and empty except for one nursery chair set square across a door that led to a room nobody was in, and a child asleep sideways, in it with her cheek against the wood. Mrs. Bettridge was standing at the far end of the passage, with her arms folded and her eyes red. 6 days, she said. She has slept there 6 days. We put a blanket on her at night, and she lets us do it, and she will not go. Damaris crossed the passage. She did not speak. She got down on the floor beside the chair, which was not a graceful thing to do, and she did not care. And she sat with her back against the wall and her legs out in front of her, like a girl on a river bank. And she waited. After a while, the child woke. Tamsin Teal opened her eyes and looked at the woman sitting on the floor of the passage, and she did not smile, and she did not cry, and she did not make a single sound. She got out of the chair. She sat down on the floor. She took a fold of Damaris's sleeve between her finger and her thumb. The same fold, the same 2 fingers, exactly as she had taken it in the great hall. Then she leaned her head against Damaris's arm and went back to sleep. They stayed there most of an hour. Mrs. Bettridge went away and came back twice, and the second time she brought bread and milk on a tray and set it down on the boards without a word. And Damaris fed the child sitting on the floor of a passage in a house worth £90,000, and the child ate all of it. The charcoal came the following week. It was Damaris who thought of it, and she thought of it because she had run out of other ideas. Everybody in that house had spent 3 years talking at Tamsin. They spoke slowly to her. They asked her questions in the bright, hard voice people use on the deaf and the dying. Nobody had ever once given her a way to answer, so Damaris got a box of charcoal from the steward and a ream of the cheapest paper in the county, and she sat down at the nursery table, and she wrote on the top sheet in large, plain letters, "Good morning." Then she pushed the paper across. Tamsin looked at it for a long time. Then she drew a window with the sun in the corner of it and pushed it back. That was the whole of the first day. It took them until dinner. By the end of the second week, they had a language. It was slow, and it was strange, and it was theirs. Damaris wrote and Tamsin drew, and there were things the drawings could do that no sentence could, and there were things they could not do at all, and both of them learned where the edges were. A question about food got a plate. A question about sleep got a bed with nobody in it. When Damaris wrote, "Are you cold?" Tamsin drew a fire, which meant no. When she wrote, "Would you like to go outside?" Tamsin drew nothing at all for 4 days, and then on the 5th day drew a gate. They went out on a Tuesday. The child had not been past the terrace since October. She stood at the gate with her hand shut hard around 2 of Damaris's fingers, the scarred ones, and she looked at the park and the frost and the rooks going over, and then she pulled, and they walked. The Duke of Holstein watched all of this from doorways. He never came in. That was the thing Damaris noticed, and could not stop noticing. Twice she looked up and found him at the nursery door, with his hand on the frame, and both times he was gone, before she could decide what her face should do. Once, coming back across the park in the early dark, she saw a man at an upstairs window with a candle behind him, and the candle went out. He did not speak to her beyond what a house requires for 3 weeks. He did not avoid her either. At dinner, he asked her whether the child had eaten, and she told him, and he said, "Thank you." And that was all. And the plates were cleared, and Mrs. Locksley sat 4 places down and said nothing to anybody and left before the fruit. Then, on a wet morning at the end of January, Damaris wrote a different kind of question. She had been putting it off. She wrote it in the same plain letters, and she pushed the paper across, and her hand was not quite steady. "Where did you see me first?" Tamsin took the charcoal. She drew for a long time, longer than she had ever drawn for anything. Damaris sat and watched a 9-year-old build a room out of black lines on cheap paper, and the room came up piece by piece, and it was a low room with a beam across it, and there was a window with a shutter half across, and there were stairs going up out of the corner, and at the foot of the stairs there was a door with a bolt on it, high up, where a child could not reach. Damaris knew the bolt. She had put her hand on that bolt. Tamsin was not finished. She turned the paper sideways and drew a bench along the wall under the window, and on the bench A woman, sitting with her head turned a little, listening to something outside the edge of the page. And in the woman's lap, she drew a shape. She had never got that shape right in any of the 50 drawings at Larksmere. She got it right now, because she had 3 years more hand than she had had at 6, and it came out of the charcoal exactly as it had been, and it was a child, wrapped in a coat, with only the face showing. Damaris put both hands flat on the table. Tamsin looked up at her and waited, and did not make a sound. She got as far as the library. It was not where she meant to go. She meant to go to her own room and shut the door and hold on to something until the shaking stopped. And instead, she came down the wrong stair and along the wrong corridor and pushed open the wrong door, and the fire was lit and he was there. He stood up. She had the drawing in her hand, and she was aware that she had it, and that she was not going to give it to him. "Sit down," he said. "I will not." "Then stand. But eat something." "Mrs. Bettridge says you have had nothing since yesterday, and I am not going to argue with you about it." There was a tray on the table by the fire. Bread, cold beef, a jug. He had not rung for anyone. He picked up the plate himself and put it on the arm of the chair nearest the heat, and then went and stood on the far side of the room with his hands behind him, which put 10 feet and a table between them. And she understood that he had done it on purpose. She sat down and ate 3 mouthfuls and could not manage a 4th. "I have something to tell you," he said, "and I would rather do it badly than not at all." She said nothing. Oberon Teal's attorney was in the great hall on my wedding morning. He came as the guest of a man I could not refuse. His name was on no list, and he sat at the 4th table, and he had a clerk with him. Damaris looked up. "Teal's whole case," said the Duke, "is concealment, not the arrangement. The arrangement on its own is worth very little in a court, because half the men who will sit in judgment on it have the same one. His case is that I hid it, that the household is disordered, and I have gone to lengths to keep the fact of it from the world, and that a man who conceals will conceal other things, and that a child cannot be left in a house built on it." He paused. So I stood up at my own table, and I put it on the record in front of 200 witnesses and a clerk with a pencil. And I did it in the first hour that I was a married man, because it was the strongest hour I would ever have, and I knew it. The fire moved. She did not. "I had a reason," he said. "I want you to know that I had one, because I have thought since that you may have believed I did it out of contempt, and I would rather you thought me anything than that." He looked at the floor between them. "And I have discovered in 6 weeks that having a reason is not the same as having a right." I looked round that hall, and I asked myself what I had to spend, and there were 200 people in it, and a lawyer, and my aunt, and a woman who has kept my house for 4 years, and I chose the cheapest thing in the room, which was the dignity of a woman I had not met until that morning, and who could not answer me. I did not do it in ignorance. That is the part I have not been able to get past. I knew what it would cost you. I decided it was worth it. I would like to tell you that I did not understand, and I understood perfectly." He stopped. "I am not asking to be forgiven," he said. "I am telling you what I did and why, because you asked once that nobody in this house should pretend, and I have discovered that a man can keep the letter of that and break the whole of it in the same breath." Damaris sat with the plate on the arm of the chair and the drawing on her knee. Then she said, "I was going to be a governess." He raised his head. 200 miles north of here. A family called Aird, 4 children, £30 a year, and my keep. I answered the advertisement myself, and I wrote the letters myself, and I told nobody in my house, because my father would have said it was beneath us, and my mother would have cried. And Larksmere had 11 people at the table when I was a girl, and by that February it had 3, and I was one of them, and I could not think of a single other way to be worth anything to anybody. She turned the drawing over so that she did not have to look at it. I left in the night on the 4th of February. I got as far as Caudry Cross, and the road closed behind me. 4 days of snow. There were 9 of us in that inn, and no way out in either direction. And then the north coach came in, she said, and there was fever on it. He did not move. A man and his wife. They were put in the upper room. Nobody would go up, and I do not blame them, and I will not pretend I went up out of courage because I did not. I went up because there was a child on the settle by the door, with nobody's hand on her, and everybody walking round her as though she were a table, and I could not sit in that room and look at it. She stopped for a moment. I had her 4 days. Downstairs, mostly, in the low room with the bolt too high on the door, because I did not want her hearing what was overhead. I sat on the bench under the window. I held her. I told her the ends of stories because I could not remember the middles. And on the 4th night, the road opened. Damaris looked at the fire. And I did not go north, she said. I turned round and I went home. I had 3 shillings, and a place waiting for me, and 4 children who needed a governess, and I gave it up, and I went back to Larksmere, and I never told one living soul. And I have spent 3 years not knowing whether I turned round because of that child or because I was too frightened to go on alone. I have never been able to get an honest answer out of myself. That is what is at Caudry Cross. That is the whole of it. It is not a secret. It is a verdict, and I have been carrying it about like a stone in a pocket, and you offered me 400 a year for it. She set the plate down. And I left before it was light, she said, so that she would not see me go. I have believed for 3 years that she died in that inn. I counted her among the dead. I put her in with her mother and her father, and I made myself think of the 3 of them together, because it was easier than thinking of her alone in a low room wondering where I had gone. The Duke of Hallstein crossed half the room and stopped. She did not die, he said. I know that now. You do not know the rest of it. Sit down. Please. She sat. She was talking when I came for her, he said. She was 6 years old, and she talked without stopping. And Mrs. Munn, who kept the house, said she had been asking the same question since before dawn and would not be quieted. I have never told anybody what the question was, because for 3 years it made no sense to me, and I could not repeat it without feeling a fool. He said it. She was asking where the lady had gone. Damaris put her hand over her mouth. She asked it all that day, he said, and she asked it in the carriage, and she asked it at Hellstein, and she asked it for 4 days. And on the 5th day, she stopped. Not the question. All of it. She has not said one word since, and no physician in 3 counties has been able to tell me why. And I have spent 3 years, and a good deal of money, looking for a woman with no name whom nobody could describe, except a child who could not speak. He was quiet for a moment. I thought you were dead, he said. That is the truth, and it is not flattering to me. I looked for a living woman for 1 year, and after that I was looking for a grave. Damaris could not speak at all. May I ask you for one thing, he said. She nodded. Not the inn. I have the inn now, and I did not earn it, and I know it. May I sit in the room? She looked up. When you are with her, he said. I have stood in that doorway 40 times. I would like to sit down in the room. That is all I am asking, and if the answer is no, it will not be raised again. Yes, said Damaris. So he sat in the room. He was not good at it. He sat in a chair that was too small for him, with his hands on his knees, like a man waiting to be seen by a physician. And for the first 3 evenings, Tamsin drew nothing at all while he was there. On the 4th evening, she drew a horse. On the 9th, she drew a horse with a man on it, and pushed it across the table to him without looking up. And the Duke of Holstein held a piece of paper with a horse on it for rather a long time before he said, "Thank you." February came in wet. The park flooded at the low end, and the rooks came down into it. Tamsin learned to write her own name, and then refused to write anything else, and Damaris did not press her, because they had a language already, and she was not going to trade it for a worse one. Damaris took over the household accounts in the 2nd week, because Mrs. Bettridge had been carrying them since October and was making mistakes, and it turned out that Damaris had been keeping a failing farm on paper since she was 15, and was very much better at it than anybody at Holstein Court had expected. Nobody said anything about the East Wing. Then, at the end of the month, Perdita Locksley knocked on the door of the small parlor where Damaris did the books, and came in, and shut it behind her. "I have wanted to do this since the wedding," she said, "and I have put it off because there is no good way to begin." Damaris put down her pen. "Sit down," she said. Perdita sat. She was not nervous. She was not anything Damaris could name. "I am not going to tell you that I am not what the county says I am," she said. "I am exactly what the county says I am, and I have been for 4 years, and I am not ashamed of it. And if you were hoping for a scene in which I turn out to be his cousin or his bookkeeper, you will have to go to a different house. I was not hoping for that." "No," said Perdita. "I did not think you were." She looked at the window. "I am not your enemy, Mrs. Your Grace. I am not your friend either, and I will not have either of us pretend, because I gather that pretending is the one thing you actually mind. I am the woman who was here first. That is all I am. Do not ask me to be gracious about it. There was a Mr. Locksley, and he has been dead 9 years, and he was not a kind man, and that is the last thing I shall ever tell you about myself. I have not asked you for anything at all." "I know," said Perdita. "That is what I came to say." She stood up again almost at once, as though she had used up whatever it was she had come in with. "He has not slept above 3 hours a night since the wedding," she said. "I am telling you, because somebody in this house ought to know it, and it will not be him. And because in 4 years he has never once looked at the door I have just come through the way he looks at the one you go out of." She put her hand on the latch. "I would rather you were stupid," she said. "It would have been very much easier." And she went out. Lady Verena Cromarsh arrived on the 6th of March with 2 carriages, a maid, a manservant, and a small dog. She disliked. She was the Duke's aunt on his mother's side, and she had buried a husband and 2 brothers, and had run the family's affairs from a townhouse in Bruton Street for 19 years. And everybody in the county was afraid of her, including, Damaris observed, the Duke. They had met once already at the wedding breakfast for the length of one sentence, and Damaris had never afterward been able to remember what the sentence was. She did not send a note. She sent a footman on the first morning to say that she would receive the Duchess of Holstein in the yellow room at 11. Mrs. Bettridge went white. Damaris went at 11. The yellow room was cold. There was a fire in it, but it had been lit late, and the cold was still in the walls. Lady Verena was sitting with her back to the window, so that the light came over her shoulder and into the face of anyone opposite, which Damaris understood wasn't an accident, and she did not rise. "Sit," she said. Damaris sat. "You may pour," said Lady Verena. Damaris poured 2 cups of tea steadily and handed one across, and sat back with her own in her lap and waited. Lady Verena looked at her for the better part of a minute. "You are not what I was told," she said. "I am seldom what people are told." "No." "Well," she set her cup down, "I am going to be direct with you, and I want it understood that I am not being cruel, because cruelty is a waste of an afternoon. I'm going to lay out what is true. You may then do as you like with it, and I shall not raise it again." She counted it off on her fingers, and her hands were very steady, and Damaris watched them. 1. On the 22nd of April, my nephew appears before the court in the matter of Teal against Hallstein, and the question before that court is whether this is a fit house for a child. 2. Oberon Teal's attorney was in the Great Hall on your wedding morning, and he has a clerk's note of every word that was said, and he has depositions from 4 of the guests, and I have read 2 of them. 3. My nephew believed that speaking plainly would kill the charge of concealment, and it did. He's a clever man, and it was a clever stroke, and it worked, and it opened a worse one, which he did not foresee, because he has never in his life been able to see round a corner that has a person standing at it. She looked up. "The worse one is you." Damaris said nothing. Teal's case is no longer that the arrangement was hidden. It is that the arrangement is so settled and so open that the wife is a formality. A wall, I think somebody called it. They mean to call you. They will put you on your oath in a public room and ask you whether your husband stood up at his own wedding breakfast and named another woman's place at his table before he named yours. And you will have to say yes, because it is true, and there are 200 people who heard it. She let that sit. "And then they will ask you where you sleep," said Lady Verena, "and who chose your marriage, and what your father owed in November, and whether you were paid. And you will answer all of it truthfully, because I have watched you for 1 day, and I can see perfectly well that you will not lie under oath, and every truthful answer you give will be a nail, and at the end of it, the court will take that child and give her to a man who wants her 4,000 a year." The fire made a small collapsing noise. "Now," said Lady Verena, "here is the rest of it. If you are not in this county in April, they cannot call you conveniently, and they will not make a spectacle of it, because a duchess, quietly at Lyme, is a dull story, and a duchess in the box is a magnificent one. My nephew will not ask you to go. He has some notion of having wronged you, and he has got it into his head that asking you for anything would be the second offense. So he will stand there and lose that child rather than say a word to you, and he will call it honor. And it is not honor. It is a man who would rather be blameless than useful." She picked up her cup again. "I am asking. Go to Lyme. Stay through the summer. Nobody will say 1 word against you, and I will personally see to it that anyone who tries is not received anywhere I am received, which is most places." Damaris set her own cup down on the table without any sound at all. "Lady Verena," she said, "may I ask you 1 question before I answer?" "You may. Who was it they made you give up?" The clock in the corner went on ticking. Lady Verena Cromarsh did not move, and her face did not alter, but the hand holding the cup came down onto the arm of the chair and stayed there. "That," she said, "is impertinent." "It is. So was everything you have just said to me, and you said it as a kindness, and I have taken it as one." They looked at each other. "He was a physician," said Lady Verena at last, "in 1801. My brother explained to me exactly why it was impossible, and every single thing he said was correct. And you went. I went to Bruton Street. I've been there ever since. And I have run this family for 19 years, and buried most of it, and I would do it all again, because somebody had to, and the alternative was ruin, and being right is not nothing." No, said Damaris. It is not nothing. She stood up. I am not going to Lyme. Sit down, Mrs. Quennell. That is not my name, and it has not been since December. And you knew that when you said it, and it was beneath you. Lady Verena's chin came up. I will tell you why I am not going, said Damaris, and then I will leave, because you told me you would not raise it again, and I mean to hold you to it. You have given me the truth, and I am grateful for it, and I think that every fact you have set out is correct. But you have made one arithmetic error. You have counted what it costs that child if I stand in a public room and answer questions about my marriage. You have not counted what it costs her if she wakes up in April, and I am at Lyme. She has done that once. She was 6. She stopped speaking for 3 years. I will not be the second woman who goes out of that house before it is light. Good day, Lady Verena. She walked out. She did not wait to be released, and she did not close the door hard. And she got the length of 2 corridors and up 1 flight before she had to stop and put her forehead against the cold plaster of the wall. She did not cry. She had not cried in the great hall in front of 200 people, and she was not going to start over a woman who had told her the truth. She stood there and did the arithmetic again, twice, and got the same answer both times. And the answer was that Lady Verena Cromarsh was almost certainly right. He went up to London on the 14th of March. He told her he was going. He told her in the nursery, sitting in the too small chair. And he said that Mr. Crail would be at Halstein through the month, and that anything she wanted was to be had for the asking. And he did not mention the case, and he did not mention his aunt. And he did not ask her for one single thing. Damaris understood, watching him say it, exactly what Lady Verena had meant. He did not come back. 5 weeks, and not one letter. She had not expected letters, and she was surprised by how much she counted them anyway. Mr. Crail came out from the estate office twice a week with papers for her signature, and each time she did not ask, and each time he did not offer. And the second week he began, without being told to leave the London newspaper on the hall table folded open at the court reports. Teal against Halstein came on for hearing on the 22nd of April. The subpoena came on the 16th. It came to her, at Holstein, by a clerk who would not come further than the step, and it required the attendance of Damaris, Duchess of Holstein, and Mrs. Bettridge stood in the hall with her hand over her mouth, and Damaris read it twice and put it in her pocket and went up to the nursery and wrote on a sheet of paper in large, plain letters, I have to go away for 2 days. Tamsin took the charcoal and did not draw anything. She turned the paper over and pushed it back blank. Damaris wrote, I am coming back on Thursday. I am coming back. Look at me. The child looked at her. Then she drew very quickly a door and a chair against it. I know, said Damaris out loud. I know. Thursday. She went to London on the 20th and slept 2 nights in a house in Bruton Street, where Lady Verena Cromarsh did not once say the word Lyme. And on the morning of the 22nd, she walked into a public room with 40 people in it and took the oath. Teal's man was called Hode. He was courteous. That was the worst of it. He established her name and her age, and her father's condition in November in 7 minutes, and he did it so gently that half the room was on her side, and she could feel it, and she knew it made no difference at all. Then he asked her about the wedding breakfast, and Damaris, who had been awake since 3, and who had a subpoena in her pocket and a drawing of a chair against a door in her glove, heard herself say something she had not planned. Mr. Hode, she said, before I answer that, may I be allowed to tell the court where I first met Tamsin Teal? Hode said that the witness should confine herself. The judge said, let her answer. So she told it. She told it in a public room with 40 people in it, and a clerk writing every word. She told them about the advertisement and the letters she had written in secret, and the £30 a year. She told them about the night of the 4th of February, and the road closing, and the 9 people in the inn at Caudry Cross. She told them about the upper room, and the fever, and the child on the settle by the door with nobody's hand on her. And she did not say that she had gone up out of courage, and she told them so. She told them about the bench under the window and the 4 days. And then she told them the rest, which nobody in that room had asked for, and which she had never said aloud to anybody except once, in a library, to a man who was not there. I left before it was light, she said, so that she would not see me go. I did not go north, and I did not stay. I went home, and I told nobody, and I have not known from that day to this whether I turned back for her sake, or because I was afraid to go on by myself, and I would like the court to have that, because Mr. Hode is going to find it out, and I would rather he had it from me. The room was entirely quiet. I was paid to marry the Duke of Holstein, she said. That is true, and I will not soften it. My father's debts were cleared, and my mother has 200 a year, and I signed it with my own hand, and I knew exactly what I was doing. Mr. Hode will ask me whether I was a formality. I was. I was a wall, and I was told I was a wall before ever I agreed to it. She turned her head and looked at the bench. But you are not being asked to decide what I am, she said. You are being asked to decide what is good for a child of 9. And the child of 9 has drawn one face for 3 years, and has not spoken since the morning I left her, and is at this moment sitting in a chair against a door in Berkshire, waiting for Thursday. You may think what you like of me. I think a great deal less of myself than Mr. Hode is about to suggest. But I am the only thing in this world that she has ever asked for, and I am going back to that house on Thursday, and I will be in it until she does not need me in it, and no order of any court is going to make the smallest difference to that. She stopped. I beg the court's pardon, she said. That was a great deal more than the question. She did not look for her husband. She had known where he was since she came in, 2nd row, on the left, and she had made herself not look, and she went on not looking all the way through Hode's re-examination, which was short, because there was very little left to do with her. Judgment was reserved. She left London that afternoon, and was at Holstein by Thursday noon, and the chair was against the door, and the child was in it, and nothing further was said. Then nothing happened for 6 days. He did not come back from London. There was no letter. The newspapers said that judgment in Teal against Holstein was expected before the end of term, and gave her name and gave the substance of what she had said in the box, and by Saturday it was in 3 papers. And by Monday she knew from the way the maid stopped talking when she came into a passage that it was in the county too. Larksmere, she thought. That is where it will land hardest. She went out on the 7th day. She walked the 3 miles to her father's house in the morning, and sat with her mother for an hour, and did not tell her any of it. And her mother, who had read every one of the 3 papers, did not make her. When she came out into the yard in the late afternoon, the light was going long and yellow across the mud, and the byre roof was steaming, and somebody had let the trough go green. She got the hammer off the nail inside the byre door out of pure habit, because there was no ice in May and nothing whatever to break, and she was standing there in the middle of the yard with a hammer in her hand, and no earthly use for it when she heard a horse in the lane. He came in at the gate leading it. The gray was lame and had been for some miles by the look of it, and he was walking on the near side with the rein over his arm, and his coat was wrong for the weather, and he had not shaved, and there was a splash of road up one side of him to the shoulder. He stopped in the middle of the yard, in the same place, in the mud. Neither of them said anything for a while. Judgment came down on Tuesday, he said. Damaris did not move. She stays, he said. She stays with us. Teal is to have her 1 week at midsummer and 1 at Christmas, and he is to be answerable to the court for both, and he took it very badly. And Crail says it is the best result he has seen in 20 years of that court. Thank God, she said. The judge read out 3 paragraphs of what you said the Duke, word for word. He said that in 9 years on that bench, he had not heard a witness give evidence against herself in that manner, and that where a child of 9 cannot speak, the court must look at who is troubled to listen, and he found that only 1 person had ever troubled. He stopped. Then he said, I have been 6 days trying to write to you. I did not have a letter. No. I wrote 11 of them, and I burned all 11. And I have ridden here from London in a day and a half on a horse that deserved better, and I still do not know how to do this. He looked at the hammer in her hand, and at the trough, and back at her face. You gave me a condition in this yard in December, he said. 3 of them. The 3rd was that I would never again say a true thing about you in a room where you could not answer. I have kept it, and I mean to go on keeping it. And I made myself a 2nd promise on top of it, which you never asked for, which was that I would not ask you for anything ever again, because everything I've ever got from you, I got by taking it. So, I am not going to ask. His voice was not steady, and he made no attempt to make it so. I am going to stand in this yard and tell you the truth, and then I am going to get on that horse, he said, and you may do exactly as you please with it. And whatever you do, that child stays, and you stay. And the arrangement in the East Wing ended in February, and I did not tell you, because I was not going to be a man who is paid for something he should have done for nothing. Damaris put the hammer down on the rim of the trough very carefully. Say it then, she said. I have loved you since the yard, he said. Not the hall. The hall I was ashamed of before I sat down. The yard. You stood in the mud with your sleeves turned back and told me the 3 offers I had in my pocket and refused 2 of them before I could open my mouth. And I rode home, and I could not think of anything else, and I have not been able to think of anything else since. I have sat in a nursery chair for 2 months that is a foot too small for me, for no reason on this earth, except that you were in the room. I thought you were dead for 3 years, and I had a stone cut for you, and I never in my life expected to have to say that sentence out loud. That is everything I have. I am not asking. The rooks went over the byre. Damaris found that her hands were steady, which surprised her. Ansel, she said. It was the first time she had ever used it, and she watched it go into him. You made yourself a promise I did not ask for, she said, and you have kept it very well, and it is the last stupid thing you are ever going to do in this yard. I have spent 3 years believing I ran away from a child in the dark, and I have been very careful ever since not to want anything, because I did not think I had earned the right to. I thought I was keeping a secret. I was not. I was keeping a verdict, and I passed it on myself when I was 19, and I stood up in a public room on Tuesday and said it out loud in front of 40 people. And do you know what happened? He shook his head. Nothing, she said. Nothing happened. The roof stayed on. And I came home on Thursday, and there was a chair against a door. She took 1 step. She did not take another. So ask me, she said. He crossed the yard. He did not touch her at first. He stopped a foot away, and he lifted her right hand and turned it over. And there was a thin white line across the inside of 2 fingers, 5 months old and never going to go. And he looked at it for a long moment, and then he closed his own hand around it. Will you have me? He said. not for the child, and not for the court, and not for the settlement. Have me? Yes, said Damaris. They went back to Hallstein together on the lame gray, walking, because neither of them could think of a reason to hurry. Perdita Locksley left in the second week of May, on her own arrangement, made in February and never spoken of. She went to a house of her own outside Salisbury, and she did not come to say goodbye to Damaris, and Damaris understood that, and was not sorry. There was one thing. Damaris went through the settlement Mr. Crail had drawn and sent it back to him twice, and the third version was nearly double the first and secured on land instead of on a promise. And when Crail observed mildly that her grace was being generous, Damaris said that she wasn't being generous, she was being exact, and that 4 years was 4 years, whoever you were. Lady Verena Crowmarsh came at Whitsun. She came into the yellow room where Damaris was doing the household books, and she stood in the doorway with her gloves in her hand. I said a number of things to you in this room in March, she said. You did. I do not take any of them back. Every one of them was correct. I know it, said Damaris. I did the arithmetic twice going up the stairs, and you were right both times. Yes, said Lady Verena. Well, I have thought about it since, and I find I was wrong about one thing, which is that I have been telling myself for 19 years that being right is the whole of it. She put her gloves down on the table. It is not the whole of it, she said. Where is the child? She stayed 9 days. She taught Tamsin backgammon, badly, and lost at it. Badly. And in November, when a gentleman at a dinner in Bruton Street referred to the Duchess of Holstein as the girl out of the inn, Lady Verena Crowmarsh set down her fork and asked him very pleasantly whether he would say that again, because she had not caught it. He said it again. She asked whether he would be good enough to say it a third time. By the third time, the whole table had stopped, and he could not get to the end of it, and he left before the second course, and it was repeated in 9 houses inside a week. She never mentioned it to Damaris. Damaris heard about it from a footman. The last thing came in September, and it came from a stranger. They had gone north for a week, the 3 of them, because Damaris had said in June that she wanted to see the road in a month when it was not trying to kill anybody, and so they came to Caudry Cross on a warm afternoon with the hay in and the inn door standing open. The woman who kept it was called Elspeth Munn. She was 70 and broad, and she came out into the yard drying her hands, and she looked at the carriage and at the Duke, and then she looked at Damaris and stopped dead in the middle of the yard. Well, she said. Well. So you did not die either. Damaris said, I beg your pardon. Mrs. Munn took her by the arm and walked her round the side of the house without asking anybody's leave, and up the lane, and through the gate of the burying ground behind the church, which was small and full of grass, and had a wall on the north side that was newer than the rest of it. She stopped in the corner. There were 2 stones together for the man and his wife from the north coach, and there was a third stone a little apart, smaller, well cut, 3 years weathered. It had no name on it. It said, A woman who was kind to a child. Caudry Cross, February. I will tell you about that stone, said Mrs. Munn, because he will not, and I have wanted somebody to tell for 3 years. She sat down on the wall. He came here on the 11th of February in the worst weather I have known, and he took that child away, and he paid for the 2 above stairs, and their burying, and their stones, and that is no more than any man of his station would do, and I thought nothing of it. But he came back, in the May, on his own, no servant, and he sat in my kitchen, and he asked me for the name of the young woman who had been in the low room with the child for 4 days, and I could not give it him, because she never signed my book. She came in off the night mail in a blizzard, and paid in coin, and gave her name to nobody at all, and I have thought since that she did not mean to have one that week. And she went before light on the 5th morning, without waking a soul. Damaris said nothing at all. And he asked me, said Mrs. Munn, whether she had been well when she went. And I said I could not swear to it, because there had been fever in the house, and half of us sickened after, and my own girl, Annie, died of it in the March. And he sat in my kitchen a long while, and then he said, then she may be lying somewhere on that road, under a hedge, with nobody knowing who she is. He had the wall built in the June. He had that stone cut in the August. He would not have a name on it, because he had not got one, and he would not have a text, because he said he did not know what she believed. He has paid for the keeping of this ground every year since, and he has never once let me thank him. And he wrote to me twice a year, for 3 years, to ask whether anybody had come asking, and I always wrote back the same, and then last winter he stopped writing, and I thought, well, he has given her up at last. She looked up. And here you are, standing on your own grave in a good bonnet. Damaris walked back down the lane on her own. He was at the gate of the burying ground with Tamsin holding 2 of his fingers, and he had understood from 100 yards off exactly what had happened, and he had the expression of a man who would very much like to be somewhere else. You had a stone cut for me, she said. He looked at the hedge for a while. I had a wall built, he said. The stone was part of the work. Do not do that. Do what? Turn it into masonry. He was quiet. Then he said, I would have gone on paying for that ground all my life, and never once known what I was paying for. There is no credit in a thing you do in the dark by mistake. Damaris looked at him for a while. Then she said, Thank you, and did not make him answer it, and put her hand through his arm, and they walked back down to the inn. She was asked, later that week, whether she wished the stone altered, and she said no. She thought about it a good deal on the road home, and she never changed her mind. Her name was on a settlement and a marriage line, and a subpoena, and in 3 newspapers, and it would be on a great many other things before she was done. And none of them were as true as 8 words, cut in the corner of a burying ground, by a man who thought nobody would ever read them. Let it stand, she said. It is the only description of me I have ever entirely agreed with. Tamsin Teal spoke on the 3rd of December at Larksmere in the yard. There is no proper way to tell it, because nothing at all led up to it. They had gone over for the day because Damaris went every week, and the child always came. It had frozen hard in the night. Damaris took the hammer off the nail inside the byre door, because there was no groom at Larksmere, and there never would be one now for any reason, except that she liked doing it herself. Tamsin held out her hand for the hammer. Damaris gave it to her. She was 10 now, and tall, and she took it in both hands the way a child does, and stood over the trough for a moment measuring it, and then she brought it down. A white line went through the middle and did not break. She brought it down again. It has gone through, she said. Her voice was low and rusty and entirely ordinary, as though she had used it that morning and the morning before that. Damaris did not turn round. She stood exactly where she was with her back to the child and her hands in front of her, and she looked hard at the byre wall for a moment. So it has, she said. Then she said, Get the pieces out before they go under. And Tamsin got the pieces out with her bare hands and laid them on the stones. And the cold went up her wrists, and she made a face about it, and neither of them said anything else at all. They went back at 4 in the early dark, up the lane, with the ice still lying in 3 gray lumps at the foot of the trough behind them. Tamsin talked the whole way, not about anything, about the pony, and the frost, and whether a rook can count, and why the lane was called the lane when it was plainly a road, and whether they might have the pieces of ice again tomorrow. Damaris let her. She had waited 3 years to be bored by that voice, and she intended to go on being bored by it for the rest of her life.